and welcome back to another episode of the Nicole Show. It's me, Nick, your pocket neuroscientist, my Rewire Collective. Thank you so much for being here. If you could please like, comment, and subscribe. This channel is growing every single week, which I'm super proud of, and I'm super grateful for you. We are going to the stratosphere and beyond. Today we're going to talk about something a bit spicy. Are you addicted to stress? Now, as somebody that is a prolific workaholic, I do believe that I've managed to hack the system and find a really nice balance between working really hard but also relaxing really hard. You know, I think there's different layers to it, and I think that different people will want different things from life. And so I always pose the question, is the stress you're feeling productive? Is the stress you're feeling actually getting you anywhere? Because there's a real balance between being able to do both. And I think that life is about feeling the stress, but then being able to recover from the stress. And that is a true definition of a malleable central nervous system that is able to push you. Now, you have different levels of resilience then. Maybe you're somebody that actually likes working like I do, or maybe you're somebody that prefers not to work as hard, and that's absolutely fine. So this video today is going to tackle the question as to whether you're addicted to a type of stress that is not serving you. Now, I can personally say that I probably have been addicted to stress, and not in a good way. In a way that has pushed me to my limits, that has pushed me to burnout, that has actually made me seek out drama in my life that I probably didn't need, and that is probably because I came from a very turbulent household. Don't we all? I'm going to break it down in two parts. So part one is the science, as always, and then part two is the actionable tips on how to manage your stress, both acute and chronic. And then there's actually a bonus part, which I'm calling part three, which is essentially the self-actualized part of the video, where you can increase your mental resilience and increase your capability to cope with stress and reach that point where you're working at a very high capacity, whilst also ensuring that you're staying healthy, mentally and physically. Addiction to stress. You might be hearing that and thinking, wow, I never actually realized that that could be a thing. But your brain can actually, in fact, become addicted to stress. So let's firstly define stress. I spoke about this extensively in Rewire. I actually dedicated an entire first part of the book to explaining how to break free from these cycles that we have in our lives, and one of them being stress. So one thing that not many people know is that there are different types of stress, in the sense that all stress is created equal, so it's still a stress molecule in the brain. It's just that sometimes it is acute and it goes away, and then you've got maladaptive stress, which means that your body can't cope with a stressful situation. So you've got acute stress, you've got arousal stress, which is probably where you're at when you're doing something like recording a YouTube video, or partaking in an engaging conversation, or having to pay attention at work. There's still an element of stress there that you need, that is required for you to get on with your day and be productive. Then you've got acute stress, which is when you encounter something that makes you feel temporarily stressed. Maybe you get cut off in traffic. Maybe your boss asks you about that email you hadn't responded to, and it sends a signal in your body. Those are all of the things that we should learn to recover from pretty effectively. The problem is that when stress remains for a prolonged period of time, it becomes maladaptive, it becomes chronic. It actually changes the functional connectivity of your brain. So what that means is that the gray matter volume in your prefrontal cortex will shrink. Your prefrontal cortex is responsible for all problem solving, decision making, autonoetic consciousness, higher order thinking. And so when that starts to break down, our ability to function as a human and make sound decisions breaks down as well. Another thing that happens is the amygdala, the part of your brain that is responsible for detecting threats in your environment, becomes upregulated and hyperactive. It actually increases in size, and we have seen studies that show this. So what that means is that when you are operating through your environment, when you are in your environment, you will have some level of your brain scanning as to whether there are threats in the environment. It's a natural part of the process of your brain that is happening at a subconscious level. But the problem is that when the amygdala is overactive, what appears to happen is that there is a hypersensitivity in how these threats are being perceived. So all of a sudden you are attaching salience to stimuli that shouldn't be threatening, yet your brain is perceiving it as something that requires you to act upon it. And so will trigger your stress system. It will trigger a fight or flight response when it shouldn't. And that can manifest itself in maybe a colleague asking you something at work and you perceiving it as something really stressful, even though it may not be as stressful as you made it out to be, because you're chronically stressed. So you can't cope with the everyday stresses that are now being put on to the stress that you already have. Are you guys with me still? Because, oh God, burnout is just, I'm scratching my head because I've been burnt out a couple of times in my life. I don't recommend it. And so that's what we need to manage, because acute stress is good for us. You know, you need stress to go for a run. You need stress to do the fun things like have sex. You need stress to do a lot of things. There's a fine balance between making sure that you're not overly stressed, chronically stressed, and having the coping mechanisms to deal with it so that you don't then become addicted to it. And you might be thinking, how can I be addicted to stress? So in come your friend dopamine. Everyone loves talking about dopamine. Dopamine is a bit of a buzzword. And, you know, rightly so. I think we want to know what is keeping us in these cycles of patterns of addiction. And so when we're under stress, our brain simultaneously releases dopamine, which can lead to a paradox because stress is bad, yet we crave it because it releases this chemical that puts us in pursuit of the drama. It puts you in anticipation, drive to attain something, regardless of whether it makes you feel good or not. So we know that in the brain, there are two very distinct pathways between liking and wanting. So this is why addiction can be so detrimental, because the wanting pathway can override whether you actually like the outcome of something. You see it in a classic example of addiction. You see it in times where you may be dating somebody that you don't even know you like, but the thrill of wanting to attain this person means that you end up overriding whether you even like them at all. And that's why this dopamine pathway can be quite detrimental to our psyche if we don't understand it. When you understand what is going on, you have a level of self-awareness that helps you assess whether these things are actually the things you want or whether you are just in a dopamine drive to attain something. Now you've got a double whammy because your amygdala is hyperactive during these stressful times or chronically stressful times. Your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making, is impaired. So your rationale to be able to assess whether a situation is good for you or not becomes impaired as well. And I've had to sort of like really do a clear out in my life about what I want and what I don't want, because some things I was actively bringing on to myself and other things are just part of life. And so how can some of these stress addictions show up in our life? For example, you could maybe find yourself overcommitting to work. So you always say yes. That could also be down to the fact that maybe you haven't practiced saying no. You might be a people pleaser, and that's probably due for another video. But maybe you create drama in relationships. Maybe you actively seek the gossip in your life. Maybe you seek out chaotic environments. And this is a classic one and this is why I make these YouTube videos, because I want to be able to empower you with the knowledge and the ability to gain control of your life and really assess as to whether the decisions you're making and whether the situations that you put yourself in are really down to the probability of the universe having amalgamated and put you in this situation, or whether you are creating this for yourself. And that's a tough pill to swallow, because I've definitely been there where I have created the drama in my life. If you grew up in a turbulent environment, that is what your brain knows. Even if you know that it's wrong, even if you want something different, your brain will seek out the familiar hell every single time versus a place of peace that is unfamiliar. I'm going to say that again. I really want that to sink in, because if you don't address these root causes and you don't pay attention to your patterns, your brain will seek out a familiar hell every single time versus the peace and clarity that is unfamiliar. So an unfamiliar heaven, you will override that, even if you know that that is what you need, even if you know that that is what is right. And it is the reason why, and I'm not excusing it, but it is the reason why people that come from abusive households generally speaking, tend to become the abusers later in life because that is what they know best. The neural pathways that have ingrained from childhood, from developmental plasticity, have gone a particular way that repeat themselves through history unless you break the cycle. The entire phase 1 of my book is about breaking the cycles that were given to us in our formative years. That programming that was given to you by your peers, your parents, everybody around you, but is that programming really yours? That's the question I pose, because it's a real big question when you really think about the fact that someone else essentially shaped you and molded you. And now you're this person that's on this trajectory, and is the trajectory you're on really the one that you wanted to be on? So, the creme de la creme you've all been waiting for. So I'm going to give you 3 tips on how to deal with acute stress. Now, acute stress can increase our resilience to be able to deal with stress. So you are supposed to feel stress. If you get cut off in traffic, you should be able to recover from that pretty quickly. It is a skill. It is something that they do not teach us at school. And that is why I'm here, yours truly, a pocket neuroscientist, teaching you how to deal with these everyday stresses. The everyday stresses are part of life. They are good. You need them, okay? I know I've reached my limits before. I know, because I was in the parking lot screaming at a payment machine because it wasn't taking my card. So I went all the way up 3 flights of stairs. The elevator was broken. I had to walk, drew out cash, came back down, wasn't taking my cash. I've been there, and it's okay if you have been there, because I'm going to give you the tools on how to deal with the chronic stress. But those little things are the bits that teach us how to become more resilient over time. So without further ado, 3 tips on dealing with acute stress. So the first thing you want to do is you want to close that stress loop. So in evolutionary times, what would have happened is you would have seen a lion, the lion would have then walked away, and you would have been, or hopefully walked away, and you would have been like, oh, okay, cool, decompress, the lion's gone, we can now relax. The problem is that in our minds, we can ruminate over the scenarios in our head. So I actually, again, spoke about this in Rewire without plugging my own book. When we look at studies on stress, the problem is that your brain doesn't really know the difference between imagination and what's actually happened. So if you come home and you continue to ruminate over the same thing, over what your colleague Susan said at work, your brain is going to perceive that you are still in that environment. Your amygdala is going to be hyperactive, your stress system is going to be activated, and you are not going to be able to regulate from that very well. So there are a couple of things that you can do. Number 1 is something like the physiological sigh. And I know you guys are like, Nick, you always talk about the physiological sigh, but it is the best tool to help you regulate from a stressful response. So what happens in the physiological sigh? So you do an inhale through the nose, you take an extra sip through the nose again, you pause at the top for a second, and a long exhale through the mouth. I'm going to do it once. So, oh my God, that actually feels so good. So, have you ever felt stressed and you're walking around the house and you're huffing and puffing and you're kind of like, ugh? That's a good thing. That is your brain trying to reset your breathing mechanism back to a state of parasympathetic. Parasympathetic meaning a place of relaxation. And so it is dumping the stress, for lack of a better term, so that you can regulate. And so sighing is really good. And that your brain does on a subconscious level, but we know that our breathing, while subconscious, can also be conscious. Like you can actively choose how you're going to breathe. You also don't need to think about how you're going to breathe, because that would be extremely time consuming and probably not conducive to everyday living. So we can fast track that breathing rate by forcing that physiological sigh. And when you do that, you're essentially communicating to your brain and body that the threat in your environment is no longer there. Now you've got a malleable central nervous system that has just experienced something stressful and can now regulate. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2. I told you, if you come home and you're thinking about that argument with Susan at work, I'm sorry if anyone's called Susan, it's just the first name that came to my mind. I'm sure you're all lovely. I'm just using that as an example. Okay, fine. You came home from an argument with a girl called Nicole. I'm not very argumentative, actually. I'm actually quite good at deflating situations. Maybe I should have been a negotiator. I actually sometimes actively put myself in these situations where I have to do the difficult thing. That's a topic for another day. But you come home, you've had your argument with Nicole, and now you're thinking about it over and over and over again. Your emotional centers that are responsible for catastrophizing, for making you feel a particular way, exacerbating negative feelings, is going to be overactive. It's going to be overriding that frontal cortex activity that says to you, hey, maybe Nicole didn't mean it like that. It is quite difficult to rationalize with yourself in that state of mind. And that is why when we look at studies, we've taken individuals, we've put them in stressful situations. We've asked group number 1, sit on the sofa and relax. And we asked group number 2 to play Tetris. That's right, Tetris. And what we've seen is that the inflammatory cytokines, so how we measure stress, are lowered a lot quicker in the individuals that play Tetris. Why? Because their minds are completely absorbed in something else. And so there is no time to really think about the stressful situation. So something like hobbies, I picked up the guitar a year ago, and honestly, I'm so mad at myself for not having done this since I was 8 years old when my parents practically forced me to do it. And I was like, no. But that for me has become like my mental sanctuary, my switching off. So it used to be ballet. Ballet was my saving grace. I'm pretty sure ballet saved my life a couple of times, saved me from a really horrible breakup, and I just dove into ballet. But unfortunately, I live on an island where adult ballet classes are impossible to find. Any hobbies like the other thing I lean on is tennis. So when I go to tennis, I'm completely absorbed in my tennis game. I can't think about the stressful situations. And anything that's going to help you completely take your mind off the things. That is why having hobbies, something that can completely immerse you in something else, means that when you come back to the problem, you haven't catastrophized and you can sort of see it from a different angle. Frontal cortex activity has been reinstated, and thus you can now rationalize with yourself and you can say, okay, Nicole actually didn't mean it like that, or I accept my part in it. That's extreme ownership, something that I bang on about all the time. I'm always accepting my part in everything because I spent a lot of time in my life blaming the world, blaming the universe, blaming my parents, blaming my family for the situations that I was in until I took control and took extreme ownership of what I could do about it. I'm going to talk about that in another video. And lastly, tip number 3. Tip number 3 is walking. Now, when you go for a walk, your eyes are essentially stabilizing as you move through the environment. We call it optokinetic nystagmus. So you've got this like forward undulation and you've got the periphery of images moving past you. It's a reflex that essentially helps your eyes stabilize. And that, coupled with the fact that you're going to be looking in your environment, actually activates a part of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex. The orbitofrontal cortex, we've seen in studies, and I'll plug the study so that you can read it, has been shown to deactivate the amygdala. So they are essentially competing for the same resources, and thus when one part is active, the other part becomes deactivated. And that is why when you go for a walk, you can process your thoughts, feelings, and emotions without the fear perception that is attached to them, without the catastrophizing. It is the reason why going for a walk with your friends is so therapeutic, and I highly encourage it. It is one of the most underrated tools to your well-being. I bang on about it all of the time. It's in my book, it's on my page, it's everywhere. I speak about it all the time. Now, top 3 tips on dealing with chronic stress. Tip number 1, you have to remove the excess. You have to remove the things from your life that are no longer serving you. The drama, sometimes it requires making that tough decision. I have spent this whole year making really tough decisions, and it's difficult. That's why they're called tough decisions, but it's absolutely necessary to your well-being sometimes to make that decision and stick by it. So removing the excess for me when I was at my lowest of lows was putting on an automated email saying, look, I'm not responding to emails right now. If you want to collaborate with me, please assume that if you don't hear back from me, I'm eternally grateful, but I don't want to collaborate. Maybe it's turning off your phone. Maybe it's taking a holiday. Maybe it's something that can just help you recalibrate and assess what is really, really important, because the only thing that is important really is your health in that time. And it's hard to see that when you're in it. When you put up the boundaries and you remove the excess, you are allowing your brain to essentially operate in low power mode. and only pay attention to the things that are really, really important, which is maybe just taking care of yourself. And so if you can, remove as much of the excess from your life and you're operating in low power mode. Think of it as low power mode. You're putting your phone on low power mode and you're essentially just saving energy for the things that you absolutely need to do. Now, tip number 2 is something like meditation. And I know some of you are going to eye roll, but let me just explain to you the neuroscience of what is going on in your brain. Meditation can help increase frontal cortex activity and strengthen the frontal cortex. Now, I told you in the beginning that the frontal cortex gray matter volume diminishes when we're in a state of chronic stress. So we can increase the plasticity of those brain areas in the frontal cortex areas, which can then essentially heal themselves. And that is necessary for everyday well-being. So meditation actually increases plasticity in the frontal cortex, which is responsible for getting you to a place where you can make reasonable decisions for yourself again. It also helps shrink the size of the amygdala, and we've seen this in not one, not two, but multiple studies, systematic reviews, meta-analyses, where we're looking at the benefits of meditation, actually shrinking the size of your amygdala. Now, I'm going to just make it even more basic for you. We have 2 networks. We have the Central Executive Network, which is your outwardly thinking network, where you're responsible for cognitively demanding tasks. You're in that network right now paying attention to me. You're not pondering your 9-year-old life. Then you've got the default mode network, responsible for internal mind wandering, creativity, but also rumination. Now, the problem is that we don't want to address those internal thoughts, that negative self-referential information. We want to push it away. And so we keep ourselves busy. We continue scrolling. We ask our friends if they got plans. We watch TV, we watch Netflix. We do anything but face the problem as we need to. We'll do anything to distract ourselves from our own internal mind. But I encourage you to sit with it, because the only way is through. You have to sit with it. You have to spend time in it. You have to deal with it. And you have to, unfortunately, go and visit that place that you so badly don't want to be in. And so meditation helps us to confront those thoughts head on. It helps us to rationalize them. It helps us to sift them out of our mind, because the way that I describe it is, if your default mode network is a type of garden, if you don't spend time in it, it will overgrow. There will be weeds. It won't be pretty. When you spend time in it, you pull out the weeds, you plant the flowers, you make the flower beds, you mow the lawn, and it's a place that you actually want to be in. And that is why meditation is so vitally important for our mental health, because you want a place that you can visit that is a place that you want to be in. And tip number 3, lastly, is regular exercise. So when we exercise regularly, we release a plethora of myokines. Myokines are muscle-based proteins that are released when you contract your muscles under tension. And they actually have a muscle-brain axis, meaning that they have a direct line of communication with the brain. And they exert different mechanisms depending on the myokine. So irisin will help with anxiolytic effects, so will actually help reduce anxiety in the brain. BDNF will help to increase the plasticity of your brain, and we know that we need that when we've been through a turbulent time of chronic stress, because chronic stress will eat away at the gray matter volume in your brain. That's very Italian of me. Things like interleukin 6, again, have anti-inflammatory properties. Now, you might be somebody who knows about interleukin 6 and you're saying, no, Nick, IL-6 is an inflammatory cytokine. Yes, it is, absolutely, but not when it is released from the muscle. And that is the beauty of the body, is that when these myokines are released from the muscle, they can have different effects. And interleukin 6 appears to be anti-inflammatory. One of the things that happens when we're chronically stressed is our whole system becomes chronically inflamed, and the body is attacking itself because it thinks that there is something that it needs to fight, but we're fighting ourselves. Interleukin 6, released from the muscle when you're exercising, can actually have anti-inflammatory properties on the whole system. So those are your 6 tips 3 for acute, 3 for chronic. Now part 3, which is the bonus part of this video, if you want to be able to work at a really high performance, making sure that you find the right balance between stress and activation, but not pushing yourself to a place of burnout, then I would firstly make sure that you are tackling your ability to deal with chronic and acute stress, and that you're embracing acute stress. You have changed your mindset about what stress means to you. Stress can be a good thing, but it also means that you address the part where you accept that you might be addicted to stress. And if it is bringing on adverse consequences to your life, then that is not good. If you are addicted to stress, but you're coping with it well, then you crack on. You're gonna fly. And I actually want to have a chat with you. And so it's finding that right balance between motivated but not burnt out, and making sure that we are increasing those pillars of resilience so that we can deal with more. Because the more you can deal with, the more you can deal with, as long as you are not breaking. That is the key point, is that as long as you are not breaking, as long as you're sleeping right, as long as you're still producing at that same level without feeling like you're going to die, as long as you're operating at that level where you are motivated but you're not burnt out. So if you want to take it up an extra notch, and you are regulated, you have a central nervous system that works, and you want to reach that upper echelon, then the things that you can do is to actively put yourself in stressful situations, knowing that you are calm. Now, things like hormesis, where you are pushing yourself during exercise, where you are pushing yourself in an ice bath or sauna, or any challenge that is mentally challenging you and physically challenging you, can help you to increase your levels of resilience. So we've actually seen it in the Wim Hof studies. When you partake in cyclic hyperventilation, which is what they are doing when you're doing the Wim Hof type breathing, is that over time, your system that releases adrenaline and the system that releases noradrenaline, so noradrenaline in the brain, adrenaline in the body, and over time, what happens is that these two systems not separate. I'm using the word separate as a visual cue to help you understand what is happening, but they never actually really fully separate. But what happens is your body can release adrenaline under stress, whilst you can stay mentally calm. And that is why putting yourself in stressful situations, but maintaining a level of calm, can help you translate that into everyday life. So now when Susan or Nicole or whoever it is at work annoys you, you are able to deal with the stresses of this person losing their cool at work. I don't lose my cool, so it wouldn't be me that you're arguing. It would be another Nicole, a Nicole that loses their cool. I mean, obviously I lose my cool sometimes, but I probably won't be shouting at you at work if we were colleagues, let's put it that way. So I hope you found today's video helpful. You've got part 1, the science, part 2, the steps on how to deal with the stress, and in part 3, if you really want to boost that ability to increase your mental resilience. Guys, my community, my Rewire Collective, thank you so much for listening. If you could please like, comment, subscribe, maybe share it with a friend. We are going to the stratosphere and beyond. It's me, Nick, your pocket neuroscientist. Please drop all of your questions in the comments, because as you know, Dear Nicole Dilemma every second week on this YouTube channel.